Jimmy, good to be here. 2 weeks out, more or less, from RSA. Big event in the calendar for you guys and for all of us and for the whole security community. But you looking forward to it? Do you find it is it too much work and not enough play, or vice versa?
Yeah, there's never enough play at RSA. I always think about RSA. I tell my wife and kids, I'm heading off to San Francisco to RSA, and I always think they think I'm, taking trips over the Golden Gate Bridge.
All they hear is San Francisco. I can guarantee you that.
Yeah, it's just San Francisco.
So describe it for someone who's never been.
Okay, so for me, every year when I arrive, the thing I'm looking forward to most genuinely is meeting up with all of the folks I know, right? So the wider network that you don't get to see, they're all in one place at a year. This year is really hard because thankfully and very gratefully, we're top 10 RSA sandbox company, which is amazing, but it's making this year very, very different, right? So we're over a couple of days early to prep, and we've got the folks who run the competition are unbelievable. So they have everything mapped out, where you got to be, your timeline, everything's super organized. They help you with what you need to do to prepare to present. But we've got an extra demo booth because we're top 10 finalists. So we've got to have people at our actual booth on the floor at RSA, and then our RSA sandbox booth. So there's a lot of extra people required.
So big team traveling over.
Big team this time. I hope we're splitting the travel across multiple planes so that it's safe for the company's continuity. But it's one of those things where it's super exciting for the whole company, and more exciting than ever this year. But then trying to meet up with people, time is at a more premium than ever. Yeah. So what we're trying to do this year is get there early, be super prepared, and do a great job at the competition, and then have almost phase 2 of it be regular RSA. Okay. So phase 2, typically with RSA, I get there on the Sunday, Mondays kind of meet up with a few people, Tuesday when the event actually starts, get your badge. I like to get it kind of midday Monday to have my badge, my creds all done. And then Tuesday, we're at the booth, we're meeting customers, we're trying to meet investors, etc. We sometimes try to squeeze in a board meeting at the end of it as well, because everyone's in the same place. Yeah. But the event itself is insane. So you're walking through the Moscone, if you've been to the Moscone before, it's this ginormous building spread across multiple buildings. And the floor has booths from a single table that has a little draped over it. That was us a couple of years ago. To companies that have Formula One cars on display. Oh, wow. It's insane, So last year it was really funny. We had a PS5 as a competition prize at our booth, and the company next to us had a Harley Davidson as a competition prize. Okay. So yeah, we're definitely the small fish.
So we're somewhere between PS5 and Harley Davidson.
Yeah, exactly.
This year. And then, is there a whole battle plan about how we approach that? You obviously can't afford to take things organically. Let's see how it goes. So it sounds like it's a mixture of, very scheduled meetings, but also a bit of serendipity around.
Yeah, and the serendipitous stuff, it sounds weird, but planned serendipity is what we aim for. So what we need to do is have messaging really crisp and clear. I actually hate that because it feels like everyone's saying the same thing. We're like robots. But the reason you need that is these folks that are coming to your booth have just heard messaging from probably 100 plus different vendors, right? And so I think there's something like 45,000 people attend RSA. So all these people coming to the booth, you want to make sure that your message is the same where they heard from person A or person B from our company, and that the message gets our main points across. Because in a sea of noise, how do you become the beacon of signal, right? And so that's critical for us to get that message across. We're trying to get 3 points that we get across to every single person, and that's it. If we achieve that, we've done a lot of things. And then the last thing is we want to make sure that what's most important for me as CTO is that our product is real, right? We want to stay away from the hype. There's a lot of hype at RSA, a lot of Venus flytrap stuff where we say, we're launching this product, and you say, tell me about it. Well, it's a great product. Well, tell me how does it work? And that information is lagging because big companies try to use this as a indicator of what to build and invest in.
Okay, yeah.
Whereas when we're there, we've got a real product. Everything we say is true. It's there today. And that's our kind of key message I want to get across, as well as what the product does.
Okay. So before we sort of zoom into what the product does and what else you're hoping to see, let's zoom out a bit, because it's the first, obviously changed political circumstances in the US, changed economic circumstances worldwide, a load of stuff going on. And then against or overlaid across all that is obviously AI going like a rocket ship, and it's hard to keep up, for not, probably hard enough for a technical person, but even harder for a non-technical person to keep up with all the AI stuff. But zoom out to the economic or the geopolitical stuff. New president in the States, some old orders, or old in a 12-month sense, orders about AI being ripped up and new ones being introduced, things like that happening. What's of interest to you in that, or is that just noise in the background?
It's certainly noise, but it's noise that is changing directions of investment, of what people focus on, and it's something that you can't ignore. So I would say the difference, if I compare it to last year's RSA, so last year's RSA was all AI, just, we had this, there's a famous James Joyce quote that I'm not going to try to get right, but it's effectively going from the south to the north of Dublin without passing a pub is an excellent, maybe impossible mission. And that was the game last year. If you could get from the south of the Moscone to the north of the Moscone without passing a sign that said AI, you'd be, it'd be unbelievable. So last year was all AI. This year, I think, will all be agentic. It's the manifestation of AI into both virtual and kinetic impact. So the action part of AI will be agentic. So what and of course with agentic then, as it has more, it gets into more places, both virtual and physical. How do you protect that? How do you secure that? Absolutely. And so RSA being the biggest security conference, it will be the biggest talking point, I think, at that. So in terms of geopolitical, how it's different, again, new president, we've seen the M&A activity open up widely. So, the biggest and most spoken about one so far is Wiz acquisition by Google. So I'm sure their stand last year was insane. I'd say this year it'll be.
They're going to have multiple Formula One cars.
10
Harley Davidsons.
Well, they had like a supermarket last year, so I don't know what it'll be this year. But
you can do a lot with $32 billion. Yeah.
And you know what? Even though I should be laser focused on everything for my mission. I will go over to the Wiz stand just to see what it's like. Right? It's
hard to resist.
It's hard to resist. So I think we'll see a lot of conversation around what are the big. So a couple of big players have made a move. Google, interestingly, weren't really thought about as a security company before they bought Mandiant, right?
Okay.
And that was their big first. They've made other acquisitions.
A former employer of yours.
Yeah. So my alma mater.
I'm sure that was part of the appeal.
Yeah, that's the only reason they bought it. But then now they've of course bought Wiz. So now Google are a major security player, whether you like it or not. Then we've got the big just InfoSec players, so not cloud relevant. What are they going to do? We've rumors around Palo Alto potentially making an acquisition. We've got, of course, a lot of new startups that are doing novel things with AI. And so that whole backdrop will be the M&A window being opened up, will create an extra layer of scrutiny. And I think one major component is for the first time we'll be talking about Chinese models, right? A lot,
of course,
right?
Yeah.
So it's not just the US and then a little bit of European models. It's now US-China models will be the main talking point, and how secure are they? Where the IP goes? Where's the investment money going towards that IP generation? There'll be a lot of conversations around securing infrastructure, right? So where chips are fabricated, the IP for that, which companies have choke points on the supply chain.
I think just today there's more updates on import bans for NVIDIA chips, and there's a whole lot of there's so many cogs in this machine that are turning. It's really fascinating,
And in my personal view and our company's view is that the attack surface is spreading wildly, and what you have then is also there's the potential for the CVE holders, MITRE, to not be taking care of the CVE database anymore.
Okay.
So will that fall to somebody else? Will DHS on that? Like, where does that go? And so that will be a huge talking point at RSA, because every single person at RSA every single company has to make sure they patch against known CVEs, right? So it's as fundamental a backbone for security as anything else out there. And so it'll be a huge talking about, unless it's resolved in the next 2 weeks. So that'll be.
Things are moving pretty fast, so it might be,
maybe,
but it could equally be blown up in the next 2 weeks. So it's,
and we just don't know.
Yeah,
and I think the less we know, the more to be talked about.
Yeah. And then the other thing I've seen, and we've talked about a bit in sort of in parallel with that, and it's kind of hard to get your head around some of these things, is obviously the U.S. administration, with the help or the assistance, whatever you want to call it, of Elon Musk, sees a lot of value in AI. So they've released some new memorandums maybe a week ago on accelerating AI in federal use cases, and they have a list of use cases that includes everything up to and including, they do designate them as high impact use cases of, deciding whether someone's going to be deported, deciding whether you get to keep your benefits, whether you get access to housing, whether you get, healthcare applications, access to federal facilities to be potentially decided by AI. I mean, all of that is, you mentioned the attack surface. This is just enormous, like if you think of, and we're going to talk about agents, if you talk about the security clearance that a physical human being would need to do some of these things, and now how you apply that level of security to digital agents who might be doing these things. I mean, it's mind-blowing in terms of the attack surface. Is that being sort of overlooked a bit in terms of, at the expense of moving at speed, at the expense of US competing with China, all these other factors? Is security where it needs to be, do you think? Especially as we move into the agent and the agentic conversation.
It's certainly a balance. So for example, agents autonomously providing information at scale and at speed to humans to make a decision, that is somewhere where you can be less prescriptive on the security requirements. You certainly have all of those things you brought up, like access to information, are they permissible, not, etc. But if then agents are actually having autonomy to make actions, that's a whole different ballgame, right? So with the government's desire to move fast and at scale, agents do tick a lot of those boxes. But if you have a human in the loop, it does lower the threshold for security. The big question I have around all agentic uses or use cases are around the identity of the agent. So is the agent a proxy? Is it an actor? Is it a information gatherer? And even at read-only, you can cause problems. So, reading a select statement on a database table that's 100 rows long is fine. One against 1 billion rows long can cause a DB lockup, right? So even read-only use cases can cause problems. So I think the government wants to move as fast as possible in the most efficient way. So I think the intent is good. How you do that, then that's where the devil is in the detail.
Yeah. And I mean, there's two, all these things split into, what's that word that I can never pronounce, bifurcate into, even with all those, you've got the potential for agents to do things accidentally, but also then the threat surface of somebody using agents maliciously. So I mean, we have conversations sometimes, and I think they're the malicious potential outcomes. But I constantly think about any new technology. I've worked in newspapers when they brought in content management systems that nobody knew how to work, and you ended up with picture caption here, come under the picture, or get printed in 100,000 newspapers. The potential for accidental damage and usage. I mean, how do you protect against this stuff? Where do you even start? Like let's be really, really basic. So because I've read those memos, and it's like speed. I think that one of them, there's a couple of directives. It's like every federal agency in the States has to have a chief AI officer within 60 days. They have to publish an AI strategy within 180 days, I think it is, and it has to be. They have to constantly prove that they're hitting targets against with AI, which accidents are surely going to happen.
Yeah, in many ways, many ways, I think this is President Trump's "We're going to the moon" JFK speech in many ways. So as we all know, when JFK stood up there and said we're going to hit the moon and put a man on the moon in I think it was less than a decade at the time.
By the end of the decade.
Yeah, end of the decade.
Yeah.
It was a you know a kind of a something to align all Americans towards a common North Star mission, and the detail was super unimportant in relation to the objective.
Nice, yeah.
And so I think that if I'm being glass half full here, I think that's what the intent of this between President Trump, Elon Musk, etc., is putting in place some of those key milestone objectives, like having a chief AI officer is really good, right? Because what you're hopefully going to do is attract some of the greatest minds and some of those people are in the US, to come in and take up those positions. And because you're going to have, one ass to kick type thing, that person will want to make sure that one, they're hitting the objective, but two, that they don't cause any unintended consequences.
Yeah.
So I think the
focuses the mind.
And I think that person in each organization is the one who's going to have to play both sides of the sword. So what do you need to do, right? So an agent, what is an agent? An agent is very simply a thing that has a purpose. So what is the purpose of this agent? This agent's purpose is to, sweep up the floor, or to open the gate if someone's number plate is coming, or whatever the agent's purpose is. The agent without a brain can't do anything, so it has a model, right? And that can be one or many models. And then that will help it think through what it needs to do. So it has inputs going into the brain, and the sensors that are available to the agent could be cameras, could be just data, could be anything, could be audio.
Yeah.
And the model has to make sense of it. And then it has tooling. That's the third thing, right? So what it can actually do, and they can be virtual or physical, kinetic or not. And so,
this is where it gets complicated, or gets, in terms of attack surfaces, is when you start introducing the tooling and the
correct. And the permutations, it's often not just one agent working by themselves. It's an agent in a symphony of an agent workforce type thing. So they all are making their own independent decisions, and they've got a collective decision-making process. And that's often a manager agent. It very much maps to how the topology of how modern business works, enterprise. But if you want to keep it really simple, so the agent is three things: purpose, brain, and tools. There are two places you need to protect, two attack surfaces there. The first is the thought phase.
Okay.
So if the agent starts thinking bad things, or thinking things that we don't want it to think, we need to stop it in its tracks. And if you do that, you will rule out a lot of unintended consequences. The second thing is the tooling. So every now and again, the agent will do something that is a good thought, but the action is wrong, right?
Okay.
And so when the brain says, to the tool to do something, you also got to police that to make sure that action isn't, really, really bad, because the idea was good, but the implementation was bad. So they're the two places you need to provide protection.
Okay. And that obviously is, to use your moon analogy, that sounds to me like rocket science.
Yeah.
That's incredibly complex, incredibly fast moving area to try and protect against, and so the solution has to be as unique as the problem.
Yeah, and I think rightly so. So if you think about, I always go back to how humans do it, right? So the big difference between an agent and a human. Right now, humans are better in every way, but agents.
It's interesting you say that, because a lot of stuff I read, there's quite a lot of momentum behind this idea that agents are already better, or not agents, but as such, but AI is already better in lots of ways. It's quite refreshing to hear you say humans are better. Maybe not for long potentially, but that it's interesting. There is a momentum of thought driven by a lot of the model developers, and a lot of the people who surround them have become the sort of thought experts on AI, and that it's interesting to hear you sort of moderate that a bit and say, well, no, hey, there's still roles for humans here.
Yeah, our old flesh and bones are still very, very important. So the how would I say it? So humans are jack of all trades and master of none, right? But where you do have humans that are masters of a specific area, that's where models are getting better, right? So where you have a niche or a very specific area, models can, with enough GPU information, human labeling training, can get better than that master in that area in a human.
Okay.
But models are very poor at being master or jack of all trades, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And so while we'll have agents that can do something extremely well and probably better than a human, like if we go to automated cars right now, and I drive a car that has the ability to stop if it senses something ahead. The speed it can spot, like identify a fractional reduction in speed of the car in front of me and instantly apply the appropriate level of brake so I'm not hitting my face off.
Right. Yeah.
That is something that only maybe Formula One drivers can do, right? And so if you and you've seen those tests of Formula One drivers are just standing in a circle and they drop poles and their reaction speeds are unbelievable. And if you get a normal human in there, they're terrible at it. So it's really good at that. But then if you put that same automated driving thing against a human in a race, the human's going to win, right? Yeah. And that's not even a jack of all trades. That's one area.
Yeah.
So we'll keep getting better and better and better. But right now, jack of all trades trumps AI all the time.
Okay. Interesting. If you take me back then, so having talked through all that, take me back to the floor at RSA, and you've been in this industry. Let's be
a while.
Yeah. And what's your BS detector for on the floor in RSA? What's real? What's somebody with a stand but no product? A product looking for a solution. All those things that are that you filter out to find the next whiz or to be the next whiz. There's a lot of these events, and I've attended a lot of them in different industries. People use them for product development, but or say we met 14 people who want X, and then they run back to their engineers and say, now we need to build X because we've told them we have it.
Yeah.
What are your tips, let's say, for people walking the floor at RSA and tell, you mentioned that Venus flytrap set up to draw you in. How do you spot that? What's the veteran's voice on?
Yeah. So I think there's maybe 3 tips. The first one is when you go to a booth and you hear the prepared message, politely interrupt that message, because if you just sit there, you'll get all that content foisted on you. And ask, can I speak to a technical representative of your team? And so by doing that, you're effectively skipping. I always think of at Hollywood events, the reporters want to get past the agent,
yes,
right,
yeah.
And say, like, I don't care your version of what Tom Cruise went through on the last stunt of Mission Impossible N. I want to talk to Tom and ask him, like, what happened. Were you really harnessed in? Were your knuckles about to fall off as you gripped that airplane? Whatever it is, right? So you want to skip through to the technical person, and then even at that, you may not get. You still have to do some work. So step 2 is when you have access to a technical person, ask them 3 specific questions. Like if it's agentic, for example, is did you roll it yourself or are you using a framework? And if so, which framework, right? So if there is not an answer available for that, agentic is not in the system. So no matter what the marketing says, it's not in the system. The third kind of cheat sheet or tip is to talk about the roles. So we talked about those 3 things that an agent is. It's a purpose, it's a brain, it's a tool. If any of those 3 things aren't present, it's not an agent, right? So ask those 3 questions. Give me one of those agents. What's the purpose? What brain are you using? And then what tools are available? Okay. Now they may need to be respectfully cautious on answering that because it could represent IP in fairness
Yes,
to
of
that
course.
person.
Yeah.
But you can hopefully spot BS there or not. If they're willing to share abstract answers for those 3 questions, I think that's fair enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is there like little visual tips? Are the sales guys dressed so they got better gilets than
No.
than the techies, or it's like
well, so
actually, joking aside, I mean your first point is really important. Say ask to speak to a technical person.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're probably going the front line at those booths are probably going to be sales and marketing people.
Well, nobody, including the technical person, if they don't have the capability in their product, is going to say that, right? Yeah. So you need to ask auxiliary questions to get to the bottom of it. And
but
also,
some of them will fail at the first question though.
Yeah,
can I speak to a technical person? Oh, well, actually, we don't have any technical people yet.
And
we're going to hire them next week. Yeah.
And that's okay. Yeah. Like I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, here's a product and get feedback on it before you build it. Yeah. But if you're a genuine buyer and you're trying to make a purchase decision, you need to know if it's today I can buy it or if it's in 6 months' time. That's really important. Yeah. And if it is in 6 months' time, let's say it's one of the bigger players, they'll often put out 2 or 3 conceptual ideas and to gauge feedback from the product owners. You might decide to wait for that big player because you're already in contract with them or etc. Yeah. Now, if you're already a customer, you can typically get non-booth interaction. So you want to schedule a meeting in one of the behind-the-scenes meeting rooms, etc. That's what we do. That's what all companies do at RSA, and you'll get the real kind of version of what's going on. But what's one thing I would say if you are going to RSA, and I always say I'll do this, and I forget to a lot of the time, bring something to write down your top 5 companies you spoke to, right? Yeah. And so even if it's one of the materials you get with the maps or something like that at RSA, record the top 5 companies you went. There's something there, because I guarantee you on the flight home you'll be thinking to yourself, what was that company? Yes, yeah. What do they offer again?
What day was that?
Yeah, which day was that? Exactly. Yeah. So that's a good way. And then when you get home, if there's other people from your company or your network, compare notes, right? Because you'll have missed a bunch of vendors, and they'll have missed a bunch of vendors, and truing up those notes and sharing is a really good way to have a action list post RSA.
Okay. There's something you said there that twigged in me, that old quote, about nobody gets fired for buying IBM or whoever, depending on your industry. And you said, if a large player might say, we're working on this, we're going to have it in 6 months' time. Is this AI security, AI in general, seems to be an industry, a sector where the entrepreneurialism and the dynamism of the small guy can maybe turn that nobody gets fired for buying IBM on its head. It's Wiz, I think, where you mentioned sandbox, we're going to go back to that in a second, but I think Wiz were in the sandbox 2, maybe 3 years ago.
A couple of years ago, yeah.
And now they're $32 billion exit. I mean, are some of those old rules of buying, buying IT, buying tech services and solutions being overturned by, ironically, by what companies can do with AI? We constantly hear the cost of setting up a new company has dramatically fallen. You've got agents who can code now. You've got, it's a really incredibly exciting time to be in this space.
Yeah, so this is interesting. I've used this analogy before, and I'm going to use it again. AI has changed the rule book completely, but not everybody has realized that yet. Okay. Yeah. So you've got the people who are creating, don't give the smaller companies enough respect. But what could they possibly do with that, small number of people, small access to capital, whatever it is. And then you've got you've got a mishmash of people who are like, don't mind those small people. They're not going to do anything substantial. And then you realize, whoa, wait a sec. Anthropic didn't exist N years ago. OpenAI didn't exist Y years ago. These were tiny companies that grew into the most brand-aware companies in the world today. So the rule book has changed, but not.
And then even sort of ripples or expanding circles around those. I mean, NVIDIA has existed for a long time, and gaming servers, and now is, at one point I think was the most valuable company in the world in the past 12 months, as a sort of ripple effect of AI.
I mean,
uptake,
it's changed everything fundamentally.
Yeah.
So if you take, for example, the green. Actually, I just want to finish my analogy. So
Sorry.
no, it's just so if you, in Ireland, one of our national sports is Gaelic football, as you know, and so the rules changed this year.
Yes. Yeah.
And some teams have adopted them super quick, and then others haven't. And then some have gone one past that and spotted loopholes in the rules, right? So this is where AI has found itself in the global stage. And so we've had, chip backs where chip sales are limited. We've had bulk buying of hardware. We've NVIDIA now, if not the biggest company in the world, definitely top 3. And so what's fascinating is those ripple effects that you speak about, they are the beginning ripple effects, right? So we don't know what else will happen.
Yeah.
So we now have Google as one of the biggest security companies in the world, right? And we now have, when we talk about green tech, everyone was worried about, I haven't heard anyone talk about emissions.
Yes.
Or carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide in a year, because now all the focus is on, we need more power for AI, right? And so the preceding 3 or 4 years, everyone was terrified of it, right? And now we still have flooding and a huge amount of global impact. But I think what's happening is this new technology is manifesting differently to everybody. And so some people see it as the solution to global warming. Some people see it as the solution to, curing cancer. Some people see it as the solution to, dangerous work environments for people, right? And so whatever you are worried about, whatever you have kind of lost faith in humanity to solve, AI now represents or is the placeholder for humanity's hope, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And so I love that, and that's why I love being in this industry. And so when we talk about security, we're not talking about adding layers of complexity and pain to everybody's life. We're talking about securing, I know this is going to sound so lofty, but I believe it. We're talking about securing humanity's hope for progression. Like, that's what we're talking about. And if that's not worth securing, I don't know what the hell is.
Wow. Very good.
Yeah, so
that's
my
impressive.
Lofty high horse.
That's quite a manifesto.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to bring you right back to where we started.
Yeah.
Sandbox, the extra booth. What are people going to be hearing? We talked about being clear on messaging.
Yeah.
What are people going to be hearing from CalypsoAI at RSA and into the coming?
Yeah. So
that puts CalypsoAI on that list that people write down when they're back on the plane.
Well, we hope we want a line on your page, please. Now the spelling is difficult, so we might give you something to remember the spelling. But effectively, 2 key messages. The first is that we protect agentic, so we protect regular AI as well, but we protect agentic.
Isn't it amazing we're already talking about regular AI?
I know.
Versus agentic.
And regular AI isn't even regular AI. No. It's last year's Gen AI is what we now refer to as regular AI. But yeah.
It struck me when you were describing the braking system in your car, how quickly we get used to those things.
Yeah.
And that equally is happening with AI.
I mean,
and it doesn't happen as a big flash in the sky and suddenly we're all converted, but it just you wake up one day and realize, whether it's right down here, using AI to help you write your emails or to make your documents better or whatever, all the way up. It's sorry, it interrupts you there, but it's funny how we're talking about regular AI now.
I know, it is mind-numbing how fast it's moving at, but it keeps it interesting.
It's absolutely, yeah. Sorry, so protecting agentic.
So protecting agentic at thought and action pace is where we that's our defensive capability, and then our big product launches are Red Team, and that is agentic driven, right? So we actually have a team of agents that conduct Red Team assessments on your AI systems, so that's your model and your app, and give you a lovely report that shows you all of the flaws. And for the record, every single model now we call it break because we're looking for a term that doesn't scare people too much, right? Because we don't want to be in that kind of chicken little part of the world. And so, to every good sport team, good offense, good defense, you have a pretty good chance of winning the game, right? So for us, it's about exposing weakness and highlighting that before you go to production with a Red Team. and then filling in those gaps with our defenses. So custom controls on top of those to fill in those gaps, and then furnish you with a report that you can prove you've done that due diligence and you've responsibly released your product.
Yeah, and I think the message there, and it fits back with some of what we talked about, is the red team comes before, during, after. So before you flick the switch on a high impact application like a decision making agent or a decision making application, you've red teamed it to the nth degree.
At that time.
At that time.
Yeah. So whatever the known attack vectors. So we release 10,000 a month, but we also have our agentic attacks that find new and novel ways of getting through. And so when you've done your due diligence and you've released and you've got a report to show you've done everything and it's a good CASI score or agentic score, then the next day you don't know what new attack's going to launch. This is the same with software all up, so it's nothing new to InfoSec professionals. However, you need to test and be aware, and hopefully first, before anyone else discovers it, that you've got a new flaw in your system, and then quickly add extra controls to bridge that gap.
Okay. But, we're going to wrap up pretty soon, but in that red teaming process, and you say you've CalypsoAI has red teamed all the major models and continues, and the leaderboard is on the website and regularly updated. What has surprised you, or have there been things that have surprised you in that process? Because when a new model or an updated model is launched, we see all these, quite a lot of pickup on performance, on how A performs versus B, and makes decisions quicker or makes more accurate decisions or whatever. But security, or certainly the word security, very rarely features in how this performs. Now that's what I know. CalypsoAI is putting that to rights. But what has surprised you the most, say, when, I won't name names, but a large model developer comes out, makes a big bang about a model, and the team here comes back and says, yeah, what we found, it does this thing it shouldn't do, or
I think the first thing I always think about is that's expected. So if you think about where, for as long as software has been a thing, there's been bugs.
Yeah.
And that's when nearly every line of code was written by a human being. So there are humans out there that understand every part of the application, every execution path it can take. But what typically happens is the bigger the application, the more humans, there's gaps, because there's gaps in communication between humans, there's execution paths that weren't understood or whatever. And so they really, they end up being bugs, and then there's a cycle of find it, fix it, validate it, release it, right? So it's no surprise when, instead of a human knowing every single line of code or humans every line of code in an application, when you release a model that no human understands any of the lines of code inside that model, and I'm being a bit facetious here, but in the parameters inside the model, they've all been created through a training process. It's no surprise to me that there are tons and tons and tons of execution paths that through that model's nodes, that there are loads of things it can do that humans don't understand. Yeah. And then there are an ever increasing number of ways to find those pathways. So as we learn more about the kind of black box nature of models, we understand more about how to navigate those in unconformist ways to get information it doesn't want to give you back out. And so if you're a model provider, I think your major responsibility is to create the best model you can create. But a very close second is the safest model you can create. And so because it's the second priority, that means there's an industry for people like us who our first priority is to create the safest environment. And so that's a lovely yin-yang that's always existed in software and InfoSec.
Yeah. Okay, that's a really good way of putting it, because it's a kind of a collaborative rather than an acrimonious relationship.
Absolutely,
and that has, as you say, it already exists across other software. So it's a good place to wrap up. Is it the most exciting time to work in security that you've experienced?
Yes, it is now. So I would say the most exciting things prior to now in my career were certain high profile breaches. And so it was a negative reason for it to be exciting.
Yes.
But I presume I work in a air conditioned office most of the time. So I've no I'm trying to cast a parallel to people I respect more than anything. But I'd imagine it's the very low fidelity equivalent of when something bad happens in the world, first responders rushing towards the thing instead of away from it. Now, what we're trying to do in the AI space is very different. We're trying to create, if you think about it, after an area is hit by an earthquake, when they rebuild a building, they don't rebuild it the same.
Yes.
They say, how can we build it safer? How can we? So each iteration of models we see, and it's happening at an ever expanding pace, we are trying to come along and say, okay, now you also need to add this, this, and this. And so the next time there's an earthquake, this building doesn't fall down. And so we're the folks that are, instead of rushing towards the scene when I used to work in a different part of information security, now we're the folks saying, we should really build the building in this way so that it's safer to operate.
Okay, excellent, very good. Well, I hope that message lands at RSA, and I think you're going to have a busy time, hopefully productive time.
Yeah, sleep will wait, but it will be much appreciated when it happens.
For sure, and we get CalypsoAI on those lists, and we'll catch up with you very soon.
Brilliant. Thanks, Gavin. Cheers.
Cheers, Jimmy.